Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing Kappa. This is what the cover of this book looks like and it is quite thin. This book is by Ryunosuke Akutagawa. This is the author's name right here because I'm probably mispronouncing it, and this was a very famous Japanese short story writer who died in 1927, so he is deceased, the author of this book. Let's talk about this book, what I thought about it, what the plot is, and feelings about the book in general. I do have a warning: if you do not like to hear about suicide, if that's very sensitive to you, this is not going to be the book review for you. I'm just going to throw that out there because it's not just a passing glance in this book, it's discussed quite heavily. Kappa. Kappa is, I picked it up because I was intrigued by the cover of it and the topic of it, and it is quite short, so I knew I could get through it in a brief amount of time, or if the book wasn't for me, it was going to be over very quickly. I've been reading quite a bit. I've read a couple books on Japanese yokai. It's something that's interested me in the last couple months, and Kappa falls in this pantheon, I'm not sure if that's the right word, of yokai. It is a yokai. It is frequently associated with rivers and streams. It has a little flat plate on its head we can see here, and it's also associated with a love of cucumbers. They do sometimes have violent actions. I believe they drown small children. That's something that sometimes is associated with the Kappa, but they're not necessarily, at least my understanding is, they're not necessarily evil. This book is told as there's a framing and then there's the actual story. So the framing is around a patient in a psychiatric hospital in Japan. The patient is just referred to as patient number 23, and he is telling his doctors this experience, and the doctors are writing the experience down, which consists of the bulk of the story. Patient 23 claims that he was living a normal life. He was going to hike up a mountain one day when the fog starts becoming very, very thick. He decides to descend, but takes a break by a river where he sees a Kappa, and he decides to give chase to the Kappa. Now, I'm not sure why he gives chase to the Kappa. I'm not sure if there's some missing context there in which maybe if you catch one, it's good luck. I'm not sure why he chose to chase it or if it's just curiosity, but the Kappa winds up leading him, or he somehow accidentally falls into a hole and into a place called Kappa Land. In Kappa Land, it's kind of like the human universe, but it's entirely made up of Kappa, who are the main inhabitants of the land, and that's what we see here. Our patient 23, is a human, but he integrates well into Kappa society, and he starts learning the language, he learns the customs, and he makes friends within society. He makes friends with a judge, with a philosopher, with a musician, and with a writer named Tak. And a fisherman, which is the one he initially saw, what that led him into the hole, or that he was chasing when he fell into the hole. So as the story progresses, it's a lot of just comparing parallels that the patient finds funny in Kappa society, but then the Kappas retort back, well, you do this in Japanese society, so is it really all that different? So we have this comparison or this banter back and forth. It really just feels like the patient recounting his experience in Kappa. But things do kind of take a little bit of a darker turn. One day, well, in this land, the patient receives word that his friend Tak has committed suicide. So they rush over to the scene of the suicide, and his girlfriend is there, and of course there's a body and everyone is kind of deceased. Well, he's deceased. Everyone is quite upset about this, and it's a very shocking and disturbing scene. Later, when the book progresses, we have a medium of sorts come in that tries to speak with the ghost of Tak, and there's some more discussion about Tak's atheism or lack of belief in the dominant religion in Kappa Land, and how that is going to affect his life, or how that did affect his life, and how that's going to affect his afterlife. So there is a focus after Tak commits suicide about his life and discussions and talking with his ghost afterwards. Eventually, patient number 23 decides to go back to the human world. He finds a way back up. He goes up, but he experiences some culture shock. He talks about how he doesn't like human faces, and eventually he becomes committed to a psychiatric hospital or a mental health ward of some sort, where he is relaying this story to us. He discusses how the Kappas still come to visit him and how they have providing him gifts, but of course the doctors are not seeing these gifts. He's pointing to a bouquet of flowers or a vase of flowers he received, but the doctors can't see it. So there is some indication of who's telling the truth. Is he truly having some sort of mental health crisis, or are the doctors just not seeing something that he can see? These are the yokai after all. They're known for being very tricky, so perhaps this is some sort of trick. And that is kind of where the story concludes, with the doctors kind of finishing up their notes like, this is how things are, and this is how this is what the story is saying. This is what the patient claims. So it kind of reads almost like a case file, but it's a short story format. The back of this book seems to indicate that it says here, let me just read this because they're going to say it better than I can. There he is well looked after, referring to the patient. He makes friends, spends his time learning about their world, exploring the seemingly ridiculous ways of the Kappa, and noting many, not always flattering, parallels to Japanese customs around morality, justice, economics, and sex. So that's what the back of the book says. And I did say that. I see that kind of culture shock, but that's experienced by anyone who goes to a new culture or interacts with people who just have a different way of living than them, where you have these you point out something and you're like, well, that seems kind of odd, but they'll turn around and point something out about the culture you live in that you may not realize as being so crazy. But once it's called out to you, you maybe see the ridiculousness of that, which there was that throughout the entire book. But when I read this book, and I had a little bit of background on this author because I knew that he actually wound up committing suicide himself very shortly after Kappa was written. So he clearly had his own struggles with mental health that he was dealing with. And when I read this book, knowing that information, I didn't focus on the parallels of Japanese society. I was almost thinking like Tak, the poet, the author who committed suicide in Kappa, was almost a self-insert seems not quite the right word. It seemed like a reflection of the author's own mental health struggles, and maybe he's thinking of things that he is considering at this time when writing this book. That was the parallel I drew. So after I finished reading this book, I went online to see if I was the only one who had this idea, and a quick browse through the Wikipedia article on this topic shows that there's also an idea in the critique of this book by people who are much smarter than me, who say that was the focus really on the parallel to Japanese society, like the back of this book seems to indicate, or was the focus on Tak and this suicide that Tak performs in this book versus the suicide that Akutagawa, the author, is going to actually wind up following through with in shortly after writing Kappa. So I naturally, without knowing there was this debate on what the focus of this book was, I naturally leaned more into like the Tak/author theory than I did the parallels to Japanese society. But again, there are people much smarter than me who I'm sure spend a lot of time analyzing this book and have their own opinions. So I would love it if you've read this book and have your own thoughts and opinions on this book. Please leave it in the comment section below. I feel like this would be a book that would be really great to discuss with someone else or discuss with a book club, because I feel like there is a lot to discuss and there's a lot of different angles that the story could take. So I'm really interested in knowing about other people who have read this book. What was their take? What was their angle on this book or the short story? What did they think about it? And are they seeing it the same way that I did? Or more likely, do they have their own unique perspective on this book that they can provide? So please leave your comments and thoughts in the comment section below. I love to receive it. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.